Hey, what's up, St. Theresa? Welcome to episode 3 of The Ark. We are in the midst of Holy Week right now, and we were debating whether or not we wanted to create an episode for you to watch on Sunday, Easter Sunday, as a family to watch together, or to make a video before the Triduum starts so you can be better prepared to enter into the Triduum before Easter Sunday. So that's what we decided to go with. We decided to go with making this video to hopefully you watch before the Triduum begins on Holy Thursday, during the Holy Thursday Mass that evening. So if you're watching this, pause. If you're not with your family, making sure you gather together in front of your laptop, your iPad, your TV screen, whatever it is, get together as a family. Episode 3 of The Ark for Holy Week. Let's dive in. All right, so in this week on the Ark, we're going to be breaking the 3 days of the Triduum down just a little bit, so hopefully it'll better prepare you to enter into these 3 most holy days in the Catholic liturgical year. So starting with Holy Thursday. Holy Thursday, and that morning is actually where the Chrism Mass is. So that's the Mass where the bishop will gather usually with all the priests of the diocese, and he will consecrate the oil that's going to be sent out for baptisms, for confirmation, for the entire liturgical year. Holy Thursday night is when we dive into the Triduum officially. This is Holy Thursday Mass where Jesus has the Last Supper, and we reenact this Last Supper during the liturgy. So let's go ahead and read now the Gospel for Holy Thursday. John 13, verse 1 through 15. Before the feast of Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to pass from the world to the Father. He loved his own in the world, and he loved them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, to hand him over. So during supper, fully aware that the Father had put everything into his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God, he rose from supper and took off his outer garments. He took a towel and tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and dry them with the towel around his waist. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Master, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered and said to him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will understand later." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus said to him, "Whoever has bathed has no need except for his feet washed, for he is clean all over. So you are clean, but not all." For he knew who would betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." So when he had washed their feet and put his garments back on and reclined at table again, he said to them, "Do you realize what I have done for you? You call me teacher and master, and rightly so, for I indeed am. If I, therefore, the master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should do also." So every Mass, obviously, we're remembering the Last Supper. When the priest consecrates the host, says, "Do this in remembrance of me." Obviously, every time we go to Mass, we're taking ourselves back to the Last Supper. But Holy Thursday in particular, we do a few different things. The one thing I want to bring your attention to as a family is the washing of the feet. This is a beautiful, beautiful scene found in John's Gospel where Jesus puts on the apron and washes his disciples' feet. This can be seen in 2 different respects. On one hand, Jesus strips himself of all his clothes, put a towel as an apron, and gets on his hands and knees and washes the dirt off the disciples' feet. One thing we have to remember is that back in Jesus' day, they didn't wear Nikes, right? They had sandals. Their feet were grimy, they were gross, they were muddy, they were caked with dust, they smelled really bad. And odds are, if you're walking for a long period of time, you're stumbling over rocks or stones, you might even cut up your feet. So they might even be potentially a little bit bloody as well. And the Lord of the universe humbles himself, becomes as a servant or a slave to wash the feet. Because remember, back in ancient times, wealthy landowners had slaves whose job was to wash people's feet and hands before meals. And so that Jesus took on that role. That's why Peter was kind of taken aback. Lord, why are you doing this? Like, you can't wash my feet. I'm supposed to wash your feet. Jesus is giving us a model of service. But on the other hand, one of the things that we have to remember is that Jesus at the Last Supper institutes the priesthood. So his apostles gathered around him. He makes them priests. He says, do this in remembrance of me. He empowers them to consecrate the Eucharist and to making sure their disciples become priests as well. And so this washing of the feet is a symbolic gesture because in the Old Testament, priests, before they did any kind of liturgical action, had to go through a ritual cleansing. So this is Jesus cleansing his disciples so that he may consecrate them as his priests. One thing I'm going to ask you to do during this time where we usually have family discussion, there's going to be a few questions as well, but I want you to do something a little bit weird for me. I want you to wash each other's feet. This is something we do on Holy Thursday Mass. Usually the priest selects 12 people from the congregation, but we can't do that this Thursday. So I want you now to wash each other's feet. Dad, I want you to start. Wash everyone's feet. Mom, you next, and then go from there. Let's dive into our discussion. So Good Friday. This is a day I think a lot of us, we at least know relatively well. We know it's the day of the Lord's Passion. And this is the Solemn Day of Fasting. It's one of the 2 days the church requires Catholics to fast. So remember, no meat and only having 1 full meal and 2 small meals that don't equal a full meal. And why do we do this? The whole point of the Christian journey is to become sons and daughters of God through Christ Jesus. And in Romans 8, Paul talks about, we receive the Holy Spirit of adoption in which we cry, Abba, Father, and if children, then heirs. But this is what he says. He says, provided that we suffer with him. This is the Christian dilemma. Because on one hand, we know that the way to salvation is through the cross. Jesus says, you have to take up your cross daily and follow me. Yet at the same time, we know a fruit of the Spirit is joy. And so then in Good Friday, it is good because it is the day that Jesus won for us salvation. That doesn't mean it's happy. Yet it is joyful. So I'm going to turn now to actually the second reading for Good Friday. If you want to read the gospel, please do so as a family, but I'm going to read the second reading. Hebrews 4, 14 through 16, and then 5, 7 through 9. Brothers and sisters, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has similarly been tested in every way, yet without sin. So let us confidently approach the throne of grace to receive mercy and to find grace for timely help. In the days when Christ was in the flesh, he offered prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And when he was made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obeyed. There's a very interesting line. When he was made perfect. So we can't read this as in Jesus wasn't perfect, as in he wasn't God, and then he became God through the cross. We know Jesus was fully God and fully man from the moment of his incarnation. So what can this author of Hebrew mean? Well, one of the words here for perfect in the Greek is telos. So it's the end goal. So one of the ways we read this from the author of Hebrews perspective is when Jesus reached his end goal. So when Jesus reached his end goal, that's when he won salvation for us. And he rejoiced that he could offer us this salvation through the cross. Yet how do we respond to serving others? How do we respond to taking up our cross? Because our telos, our end goal, is ultimately heaven. But we know we get there through the cross. We get there by being co-crucified with Christ through cruciformity. Yet a lot of times we balk at sacrifice. We balk at serving others. We find it offensive almost to serve our brothers and our sisters, both literally and spiritually, our children, our spouses. Yet this is the goal. This is the path. And Jesus, especially on Good Friday, leads this path for us. Let's go ahead and dive into those discussion questions. So now, on the third day of the Triduum, is the Easter Vigil after Holy Saturday. So we have to remember, Holy Thursday, Jesus consecrates his apostles as priests, and he institutes the Eucharist. But on Good Friday, it's the day of his Passion. And that's why we as a community and as a church, we don't actually, it's the only day of the year on Good Friday, we don't consecrate more hosts. Doesn't mean we won't have a communion service, but we won't consecrate more hosts. Then on Holy Saturday, Jesus fulfills perfectly the Sabbath commandment of rest. Because remember, the Sabbath day for our Jewish brothers and sisters is Saturday, it's not Sunday. And Jesus rested perfectly in the tomb. He descends to, and the Creed says, descends into hell. But one of the things we have to remember is when Jesus descended into hell, it's Sheol. It's not the hell of the damned. What do I mean by that? What is hell? Hell is total separation from God. It is total self-isolated separation from God. So logically, we know that God can't go to the hell of the damned. Why? Because then it wouldn't be hell. It wouldn't be total separation from him. So in tradition, we know that Jesus descended into what's called Sheol in the Old Testament, or the place of the dead, where faithful Jews would wait for the coming of the Messiah. So Jesus descended into Sheol. He preached to those that are dead and gave them a choice. And at the resurrection, we have the people like Lazarus in the parable, who was in the bosom of Abraham, who then, through Christ, received salvation. But there's also people in the place of the dead who rejected Christ and then would descend into the hell of the damned. So Jesus rested perfectly. And so we're also called to rest on Holy Saturday. We shouldn't be doing anything to kill time on Holy Saturday. We should be waiting in eager anticipation for Easter Vigil or Easter Sunday. In the Easter Vigil, we have a lot of readings. We basically go through the creation account. We go through salvation history. Why? Because Jesus has created a new covenant that fulfills all the covenants of the Old Testament. This is the new creation through Christ. So we have to remember creation. We have to remember the Old Testament. We have to remember the story of salvation so we can better understand this new creation that Jesus is inviting us to. So let's dive into the gospel for Easter Vigil. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, approached, rolled back the stone, and sat upon it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow. The guards were shaken with fear of him and became like dead men. Then the angel said to the woman in reply, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are seeking Jesus the crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead. He is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you." Then they went away quickly from the tomb, fearful yet overjoyed, and ran to announce this to his disciples. And behold, Jesus met them on their way and greeted them. They approached, embraced his feet, and did him homage. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me." It's striking that the first thing the angel and Jesus say to the women who notice the empty tomb is, "Do not be afraid." And one of the things I think Jesus is telling us this Easter season is, do not be afraid. We're in uncharted waters. And even as a family, you doing this together as a family, that might be uncharted waters. But do not be afraid. Dad, don't be afraid to lead your family to heaven. Mom, don't be afraid to lead with your husband. Children, don't be afraid if your parents are forcing you to do something that you haven't really done before. Don't be afraid to be authentic disciples of the risen Messiah. With that, we'll dive into our last set of discussion questions. So thank you so much again for joining us for this third episode of The Ark. I hope this better prepares you and your family to dive into the Triduum, the three most holy days of the liturgical year, so that we may greater rejoice as authentic disciples of Jesus Christ in this Easter season. And don't forget, the Easter season is that. It's a season. It's not just one day. We have 50 days to celebrate with the risen Messiah and rejoice with each other. So making sure you do something as a family to commemorate this amazing day, this amazing feast. Buy a cake, have a drink with your spouse, have a nice glass of wine, enjoy some candy with the kids, do something. Rejoice as a family. Do a virtual Zoom meeting with your extended family who you can't be with. And let's make sure we're living this Easter season as disciples of the risen King. Thanks and God bless. And thanks for tuning into The Ark.